Today's conversation is a part of Podcastathon, a global movement of podcasters highlighting organizations changing their communities through service with episodes airing worldwide this week. But this isn't just an episode about homelessness or even spotlighting the Oklahoma City Homeless Alliance. It's a conversation about leadership inside complexity, what it takes to engage other leaders strategically and sustainably in solving large-scale community challenges while keeping dignity at the center of the conversation. Welcome to Deals with Heels. I'm your host, Deborah. Today's guest is Megan Mueller, President and CEO of the Homeless Alliance here in Oklahoma City. From graduate intern to leading one of the most collaborative homelessness response models in the nation, she has grown alongside the mission that she now carries. Welcome, Megan. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
When I started talking to Podcastathon about wanting to take part, I got invited to take part, and I was looking at different organizations to partner with. OKC Homeless Alliance was on the top of my list. I have a friend that worked on one of the projects on the leadership side from the community, and I am really excited about everything that you guys are doing. The first thing that really stood out to me was because we have a lot of conversations on the show about leadership, about building trust and building demand and all of the things that are really important in getting support and growing your business. You have been with the Homeless Alliance since you were a graduate intern. So what about the Homeless Alliance and the leadership and how they invested in you gave you the trust and loyalty to stay with them and continue to build that legacy even after those leaders were gone?
Yes. So you're exactly right. I think a lot of times, we kind of stumble onto our paths, and that is for sure my story. This was not my goal in life to work in homeless services. I actually came to social work after a brief career in education. So, initially right out of college, I taught for a few years, and I quickly realized that was not my long-term path. And so I started looking at other options, and that's when I found social work and got into grad school, and I did an internship with the Homeless Alliance. And again, never would have dreamed that I would still be here almost 13 years later. But I think what really hooked me, I think exactly what you said, just the culture of the workplace. At the time, our executive director was Dan Strawn, who was our founder. He's our founding exec. And he did a great job of really cultivating, like I said, that culture from inception and keeping it as we scaled. And so I feel very lucky because when I started, I think I'm employee number 15. Now I have over 150 people on my team. So we've
Wow.
grown a ton, but I've really been able to be on the ground floor for a lot of that growth. And in a lot of ways, I grew up with the Homeless Alliance. So, when I started here, I was an intern. I wasn't married. Every major milestone in my life has happened in the context of me working here. And I think that has actually been really good for me as I've taken on more leadership roles, because the reality is I don't know myself outside of this place, and so much of who I am as a person has been formed by this environment and this culture, and has been formed by, again, those leaders who came before me, who poured into me and made me believe that this is something that I can do. And so at this point, it's just so deeply ingrained in my identity that I can't imagine doing anything else.
What did becoming a leader in the organization teach you about yourself?
I think I've learned a lot just about confidence and what leadership means. Think that, you know, even as a high schooler and in college, I thought maybe I didn't have like the leadership DNA. I thought being a leader looks a very certain way, and that's not how I am. I am not a person who walks into a room full of strangers and leaves with 50 friends. I'm more timid. I like to take more of a back seat. I'm an observer. And so I think that I've learned a lot about leading in different ways, and that there's a time and place for those different types of leadership. And I think I've learned that I can be very effective by leading with curiosity, by listening first. I think that I've learned to harness those things as my strengths rather viewing them as weaknesses.
Congratulations, because it's worked really well for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love the leading with curiosity. My 2025 goal was to listen with curiosity. My mind works 1,000 miles a
Mhm,
minute, and
mhm.
curiosity is something that will always make me stop to learn more. And it's like a word that helps me kind of slow down and realize I need to be more invested in the conversation and understand and be curious. And it really prevents you from being defensive when you're curious.
That is so true. And I think, especially in this work, we're working with people who are coming to us with a lot of trauma and a lot of challenges. And so it's a perspective and a posture that we have to take constantly with the guests that we're serving through our organization. But I think that that same posture works so well when I'm interacting with my staff. I think, we talked a little bit earlier just about our collaborative approach and how important collaboration is to us as an organization. And I don't think we would be nearly as effective if we weren't, asking questions first.
I agree with that. And I think you starting as an intern, you really have that individual kind of view of homelessness, this individual people that we're helping. But you've had to transition into systems and sustainability. Tell me about that and how that narrative changed to that system level reality. Like, when did that
Yeah,
happen? When did you really see that?
yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. Just when I was an intern, I was kind of trying to figure out what do I want my like internship project, my kind of like legacy from my internship. What do I want that to look like? And we had a program in our shelter called Fresh Start. It's an open art studio. It still exists today. It's an opportunity for guests of the shelter to come into a space and just create, and kind of set aside, again, whatever baggage, whatever trauma, and to assume this identity of artist, and just to create whatever they want in a safe environment, right? And so that program just really resonated with me as an intern. And I had this thought at the time that it was just the class. We had not like done anything publicly with the program. It really was just that safe space. And as an intern, I thought, this is a really incredible opportunity to destigmatize the population, to create identity for people who are used to being overlooked. And so, what would it look like if we displayed the artwork? What would it look like if we had an art show? What would it look like if we invited the public into this space? And so, as an intern, I went to our executive director, again, founding executive director's office, and I said, "Hey, like, you don't know me. I'm an intern, but I have this kind of kooky idea, and I want to have an art show, and I want to build these walls and display this art, and I want to invite everyone. And, like, what do you think?" And he was like, "You know what? Try it." And we did, and it was great. And we have art shows all the time now. We just wrapped one up at a local gallery in the Plaza District, where, again, art artists have the opportunity to engage with the public in that meaningful way. And that never would have happened if Dan wouldn't have said, try it. Try it, see what happens. And I think that that is something that I still really carry with me because I think that it's so unique. I don't think that that is an experience that many interns have, where they can walk into a founder's office and say, "What do you think about this idea?" And that the response is, "Try it, see what happens." But that's worked really well for us. And so that's something that, again, just as I've progressed through this agency, we've tried a lot of things, some successfully, some not as successfully. But I think that that really early touch point gave me gave me kind of this paradigm of not being afraid of taking the chance of trying something out of the box, of thinking about my job as a creative outlet. And again, I think that that has served us really well.
And it serves your clientele really well also. I am a budding artist. I started painting in 2020 in my fees and found a hidden talent and the ability for art to process trauma
Mhm.
without you having to talk about it must be just
Huge.
so rewarding and huge for the people that are doing it because you don't know that that's what's happening. You just know I'm painting and I feel really good afterwards.
Yes. Yes, and it's that identity piece too. Like, once you've created something, you're not defined by your experience at that point. Once you've created a piece of art, you're an artist. And that's such a different identity than like a person experiencing homelessness, you know? And it's really important to us to keep that in mind and to not define people by their experiences. And so I love any opportunity to create those pathways for dignified existence and kind of cultivating that shift in identity.
It's amazing. I didn't know about your art program. I knew about several of the other
Yeah.
ones, but that one is fantastic. I love that. I want to talk about building systems instead of stories.
Hmm.
You know, marketing for an organization like yours is about the stories and about touching people. And those are important, but real lasting help is sustainable, and that only happens with systems and putting leaders of other organizations together and leaders of the public together. And I think the Homeless Alliance has done a better job than most. And having all of the things that you guys do in one organization, first of all, is mind blowing and fantastic and better than almost everywhere in the country. But seeing it, even just the Westtown Resource Campus and having all of the services there under one roof, it's really important, really, really important. Can you talk about that and how all of those take place? There's so many of them, but that collaboration is unique and it's very important.
Yes. One of the things that I'm so grateful for, especially as I've made this transition. I'm almost 2 years into being CEO. So since I started as an intern and have had many roles here, about to hit my 2 years. And I cannot overstate how lucky I feel that I'm not doing the work alone. And I think, I understand that you talk to people from all over the world. I think such a kind of perfect glimmer and picture of Oklahoma City and what we have to offer as a community is this sense of true partnership. I could not do this work without the dozens of other people who are running organizations in this space, in the nonprofit community, in the homeless response system. There is such a sense of true camaraderie. I text with CEOs from other organizations every single day, from the very mundane, who is fixing your doors, who are you calling for plumbing, to, the, hey, I've had a really rough day and I need to process this with someone who understands what it's like. And again, I cannot overstate how critically important that is and how much that elevates all of us. We are all better because of that collaboration and how we work. And so I think for us as an organization, that is why that collaboration has been such a critical piece of our DNA. There's wide recognition that homelessness as an issue is complex. There's no one size fits all solution. People are very complex and very different and respond to different strategies and different interventions. And so I think that again kind of having that posture of curiosity and humility and recognizing that we cannot be all things to all people and that's perfectly okay, because we work with lots of amazing organizations. And if it's not us, we can point you in the direction of someone who's going to be, a better fit for you. And there's not that kind of like territorial possessiveness over the work. That to me is our secret sauce. It's the idea that we know that we're stronger together. We know that no one organization can solve this on our own. And that if we can really kind of zoom out and look strategically,
Oh, wow.
sorry, we're all
We're
getting
all
our
getting it.
alarms going off. But
Okay.
if we can zoom out and really look strategically and high level at the system, again, that ties directly into sustainability. For example, you mentioned we have a lot of different programs going on. I talked about Fresh Start. We have the Westtown Resource Center, which is kind of the hub for our case management services. We have rotating partner offices, so partners from the Department of Mental Health, the VA, in our building throughout the week, providing that on-site access for the people that we're working with. We also have a day shelter, a low barrier day shelter on our campus. It's open 7 days a week. It's a safe space for people to come during the day. In 2024, we averaged 401 people a day in that facility, so it's very highly utilized. There's
Wow,
no
that's a
way
big
that
deal. That
it's
says a
a big
lot about what is available when people go there. They feel safe, they
yes,
feel supported and
yes.
and empowered too.
It's completely overwhelming, right? There like no one organization can respond to all of that need. So, the collaboration, like I said, makes us stronger. It's also out of necessity. There is plenty of work to go around. And again, it's one of the things I love best about being a leader, specifically in my community. I feel like we really are galvanized around those shared goals. And I think when we zoom back and look at the system, I think I'm really excited about the future and where we're headed. A lot of the organizations in town are run by females as well. And that has been a really exciting thing to witness because, again, I just think there's this sincere desire to do not just what's best for our organizations and our teams, but for the entire system and, by proxy, the people who are moving through that system. And so something that we've talked about over the last several months is kind of this idea of like no sacred cows, right?
Mhm.
I think that being willing to admit that, you know what, maybe you do that a little bit better than me, and that's okay. And maybe we work together and I figure out how to help you like continue to do that better. And we own this other piece. And being comfortable with that, again, I think that's very exciting. I think that at the end of the day, our city and our system is going to be so much better equipped to respond to the ever evolving needs of the population because we're not clinging to those sacred cows.
I love that. What do you think about the how the Oklahoma City approach, how it differs and why other larger communities aren't jumping on board? Why we're
hmm
not seeing other cities develop this kind of approach? They still struggle to implement that. And it's so effective. Why do you think that is?
think, Oklahoma City is such an interesting place. And I think that a lot of it really is born out of our shared trauma. I was very young when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, but I remember it. Everyone who lived here does. And the Oklahoma standard gets thrown around a lot, but it's real. And I do think that there's something to be said for a community experiencing that shared trauma and having to figure out how they're going to come out on the other side of that stronger. And so I really think that's a big part of why we've been effective and why we, again, have maybe been quicker to acknowledge the value of that collaboration and the value of not even just collaboration, but like true coordination in services, true partnership.
Systems that reach across that incorporate other organizations into your system that you
Yes.
built. That is you leading the way amongst your peers and finding a system, building a system that everyone can participate in and not being competitive about it and
Right.
welcoming that
Right.
collaboration.
And again, I think part of it, we were kind of forced into it through this shared tragedy. But I think when you look at where we are now, it's so incredibly powerful and so beautiful that we were able to turn something like the Oklahoma City bombing into this network of providers who are committed to helping, committed to making our community the best that it can be, and who don't feel that sense of competition.
That's the perfect answer. I want to move into kind of innovation that is really has dignity at the heart, and opportunity is what really transforms people, and it requires leadership to build it. And you guys have built so many community partnerships with for profit, with higher education, and those to do everything we've talked about up to this point would be phenomenal. But now we add in this kind of back to work,
Mhm.
back to empowerment, back to feeling purposeful as an individual that's experiencing homelessness. And I want to really talk about those things. There's, of course, the Curbside Chronicle that I buy every single week.
Yay!
And sometimes I'll buy it twice because be on a different road and I'll be like, "Oh,
Yep,
I bought it from
yep.
somebody else." Not expensive. And it, to see how that publication alone has evolved into its quality has gotten better. Everything about it has gotten better. Now we have curbside flowers and Sasquatch shaved ice. And I want to talk about what it takes operationally to turn an idea into a sustainable employment pathway for unhoused people, because that's really it. Solving all of their problems, just giving them a shelter and a blanket isn't enough. It doesn't solve the problem. It's focused on charity instead of solutions. And I love how all of that, you guys are just doing it and you're expanding it and you're growing it. And I want to talk about what it takes to do that.
Yeah, so Curbside is kind of it's our social enterprise branch of our operations. So you mentioned the Curbside Chronicle, that's a street paper. We're the only street paper in Oklahoma. We're a member of the International Organization of Street Papers. We also have, like you mentioned, Curbside Flowers, which is a full service flower shop. We mainly work with people who are transitioning out of homelessness. Maybe they are stably housed, but they're looking to, expand those income opportunities. Love that word. That's exactly what it is. We have Sasquatch Shaved Ice, which is a snow cone stand that's targeted more at kind of first opportunities for employment. So youth who maybe have experienced homelessness or have risk factors for experiencing homelessness. It's an opportunity for them to resume build, get some skills. And then our newest social enterprise is Curbside Apparel. So we do screen printing, we do like proprietary designs, we do, print jobs for schools and churches and businesses. But all of them are kind of under that Curbside Enterprise umbrella. And really, it's more of the same story. That again was the idea of literal teenagers. Literally, the founders of Curbside were teenagers in college when they dreamed up this idea. And again, brought it to Dan and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "That'll never work, but let's try it." And
And
turns
look
out,
at it. How long has it been?
exactly. Yeah, that was 12 years ago. So yeah, turns out it did work and the community has responded beyond our wildest dreams. And again, I think that the secret sauce of that program, it's creating those opportunities, it's helping people develop skills. I think almost most importantly, again, it is destigmatizing the population in a way that like nothing else has. Because every time we sell a magazine, every time one of our vendors meets someone on the corner and sells them a magazine, it's not only the upward mobility, the economic mobility, like exchange of dollars that are going directly into their pocket to pay for basic needs, rent, food, whatever they need. But it's also a positive interaction between two neighbors that might not organically happen otherwise. And those positive interactions, I think, again, have gone so far in the way that our city thinks about this issue. I think, a lot of times when we talk about homelessness, there's this tendency to other. There's this tendency to say, That could never happen to me. Those people made different choices than I make. That is not my story. And I think the more that, again, neighbors get to talk to each other, the more we realize, wow, we're actually not that different, right? Oh,
Mhm.
wow. Like that, maybe that could have been me. Maybe like, but for this, and this, I'm in that position. And I think the more that we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes, the more that we can see that experience as an experience again and not a moral deficiency of the individual, the better we're able to respond as a community. I mean, so again, in my mind, that has just been the incredible benefit of having those social enterprises. And it's not easy. You said, like, what does it take? It takes a lot of hours. Our team of people who are working on the social enterprise side, they work tirelessly. We just are coming off of Valentine's Day.
Those
I'm
flowers.
telling you, they have been working around the clock. I went up there on Saturday to the flower shop and we had sold out of arrangements, and we're making additional arrangements because it was still early enough in the afternoon that we were thinking more people might come in, and we'd sold out all our product. But it's just a testimony to how hard that team works.
And those
And
are people that aren't your employees, really. They're not your Homeless Alliance team. Those are people experiencing homelessness that have gone to school through that program and
Mhm,
learned floral design and are
mhm.
actually working for wages to help them relieve their homelessness and have
Mhm.
income. And it's
And it's
amazing.
it's both and. Like, the flower shop is just such a beautiful example of that because you're exactly right. We have the people who are, staff members who maybe don't have the experience of homelessness in their background, and then we have the people who are transitioning out of homelessness who are working campaigns, putting in dozens and dozens of hours to make sure that everyone in Oklahoma City gets the most beautiful Valentine's bouquets. But even that is so collaborative and it's such a team-based approach. But again, that support piece is really hard and it takes a lot of work. But I think that it just comes down to, believing that it's the right thing to do, believing that human beings deserve those opportunities just because they're human beings, because they're people, with no other prerequisites. And I think that core belief is what drives us and pushes that work forward.
And there's a huge stigma around homelessness in that people think they choose that. They're doing it because they want to do drugs instead of work. All of this negative stigma. And you see a program like that where they are transitioning out. It is creating that stable income, that learned job experience, the job
Mhm.
training that you need. Rarely hear about those programs, and you're building them in action. They're sustainable. They really transition people out of homelessness. Why do you think there's such a stigma around it and they can't see these parts of what's happening?
Again, like, I really try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I don't think that people are trying to be cruel by stigmatizing this population. I think that a lot of it comes from a place of self-preservation. Again, if the experience of homelessness is the result of choices alone, I can control whether or not that is something that happens to me. If I'm
Great
willing to,
point.
yeah, there are these larger systems at play, and that we're not all on equal footing, and that sometimes, bad things happen that causes these domino effects in people's life. If I'm willing to admit that this experience is a combination of many systems at many levels and not just the individual circumstance, then I have to be willing to admit that I'm not immune. And that's really hard. That's really hard
Ooh,
for people.
it is hard to step into that vulnerability and step away from the privilege of
Right,
not knowing something's a problem because you haven't experienced it yourself. And we
right,
all have that privilege in many ways in our
right,
life. And it's become such a negative context word, but it's just based in reality. I haven't personally experienced it. So I
right,
have to connect with someone to understand it. And
right,
they don't want to connect. That's scary too.
right,
So
right, and I think too, I think about even if even if there were circumstances in my life that were challenging that arose, I have a social network. I have people I could call. Not everyone has that. Not everyone has a family. Not everyone grew up in a family.
and
And
as you
that
get older,
y-
the people that supported you that were older than you are gone.
they're gone.
I mean, I lost my mom in
I'm
2021.
sorry.
Seriously, the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my
I'm so
life was losing
sorry.
my mom. And it was at a critical time in my life where I was at the very bottom, uh, and not having just she was my person. So
Mhm.
having to branch out and be vulnerable enough to build that ecosystem within my own community. But there are people who move somewhere, they don't know a single soul. They don't have even the fallback people that
Right.
so that's a really excellent point.
We
And
talk about that so much with my team. There's, kind of a hot button word in this industry is like self sufficiency. We talk a lot about helping people become self sufficient. And I totally reject that because I am not self sufficient, right? I rely on so many people every single day to make it through. And I think that's by design. We were not designed to be islands, we're designed to live in community. And so, that's again, it's kind of my soapbox when I talk to my staff, like my case managers. I'm always like, our goal is not self sufficiency. Our goal is how can we help our clients plug into their community in meaningful ways so that if they ever find themselves in this situation again, they have that natural support network built in. Because really, that's what we're doing. We're that support system in lieu of the natural supports. And so, how can we help you rebuild your natural supports so that this never happens to you again? Because again, that's literally the difference. That's the difference between me and someone who lives outside. I have the supports.
it is. And so, really looking at it from you're building an ecosystem for
Yes.
each of those people so that they have it to
Yep.
lean on and to help them move through it and
Yep.
sustain it, really
Yep.
sustain it. So, I want to move into the friction, right?
Mhm.
We all can see that the opportunity exists to really make a huge impact on homelessness and sustainability. It doesn't always happen. Opportunities there, but what holds leaders back? Leaders in the business world, leaders in even bigger in corporate world, leaders in other nonprofits. What holds them back from getting involved? Where's that friction happen?
Gosh. The last year, 18 months, I think so much of that friction has come from just general uncertainty about the world. I think that that is just so rampant right now. I think we're confronted each day with so many giant, enormous problems that it can feel really overwhelming. And I think, that's something I even struggle with as I try to be just an informed citizen, an informed adult trying to navigate this life is, how do I balance what I can control versus what I can't control? And for me, the answer has been just like leaning into the hyper local, like leaning into my community and being okay with accepting that, like, the world is really uncertain and the world is really scary, but I know that I'm going to show up today and I'm going to do my job and my corner of my community is going to be a little bit brighter because of that, right? And like
So
and
how
that
can we
that's okay. Yeah.
how can we transfer that? We have huge corporate leadership and civic leadership, even here in Oklahoma City. And often it's difficult to get them to even write a check, let alone partner with something that's sustainable, that's going to take years of investment personally from that leader and from their company. A way that we can, like, how do you communicate that? If you're coming into maybe a commercial boardroom, a for
Mhm,
profit company boardroom, and trying to connect with them on a level so that the privilege leaves and they can see how they can impact it
mhm.
in a bigger way. Yes, with money, but also with commitment to systems and incorporating those systems into their businesses and how they operate as well.
Sometimes I think it starts with economics, which is funny because this is very human work.
Right.
But I think sometimes the segue into kind of the humanity and the heartstrings is the purse strings, right? And so a lot of times in social services, there's an economic benefit to doing the humane approach, right? Putting someone in housing is actually cheaper than leaving them outside. And if we can start there, I think that that's kind of my strategy in a lot of this is like starting with common ground. Even within the political landscape of our state and our country, like there's there's always some common ground. We agree people shouldn't be living outside. Can we start there? Can that be the baseline? You might not like it because it's bad for business. I might not like it because of a different reason. But if we can agree that that's our foundation, I think we can build on that. And so I think that that is a big piece of it is again, just kind of starting at baseline, finding that common ground, making an economic case and then building to a human case, I think is a good way to build that cross sector collaboration. And again, I think that Oklahoma City is a really good example of that. So, over the last couple of years, you may have heard of the Key to Home Partnership. It's a community wide effort, again, to move the needle on this issue in a productive way. And when I say community wide, it's led by the city of Oklahoma City. It involves our local philanthropy, it involves our local business community, and it involves our provider community on equal terms, right? No one is absolved. We're all implicated in the strategy. But we've seen that play out in some really powerful and beautiful ways. So we had this goal of housing people directly from homeless encampments. Our goal was to house 500 people directly from encampments over the course of 2 years. We've surpassed that goal. We've housed over 520 people directly from the streets. I know, into permanent homes. And none of that would have been possible without everyone owning their part and everyone working together. And that is just true, right? We had to have the political will to say, hey, we're going to take a systemic approach here. We had to have business leader buy in. All of those 520 people, they're living in units that are owned by landlords, right? We had to have that buy in. We had to have that buy in, not just like you said, in writing a check, but in a real meaningful partnership. We're moving tenants into their units. We're working with them. We're committing to that ongoing relationship. We had to have the providers on board. They're the boots on the ground and it's working. And so I think again, kind of starting with a baseline, recognizing that no matter where we're coming from, we can find that common ground and building on it. And then I think again, just leaning in, committing to doing the work. And then I think once you have some positive outcome, it kind of snowballs from there, right? Once you can say, hey, we tried this, it really worked, it's going really well, then you get people excited about it and you're able to scale.
I'm excited about it. I
Yeah.
worked in construction for a while when I was married and raising 5 kids and working on somebody else's passion other than my own,
Oh my gosh.
and that is really the key. Housing first, opportunity next, putting a system in place to get people through it so that they're able to
Mhm.
stand on their own within their own ecosystem. Which
Exactly.
no one stands on their own. I
Right.
mean, that's a terrible in fact, if you're out there standing on your own, go find somebody, even if you
Yep.
walk in to volunteer somewhere. Humans
Yep.
need a purpose to feel fulfilled and to live a good life and to be healthy. And homelessness really takes away that purpose. Their purpose
It
becomes
does.
survival. So giving them housing first and the opportunity, it's such a key piece.
Yes.
And you have described it really well. And it takes leaders coming together with a common goal and putting of sustainability of we're going to help
Mhm.
people through it sustainably and give them that support and a path out rather
Mhm.
than just I mean, it's going to be really cold here. Everybody suddenly thinks about the unhoused
Mhm.
population and they want to donate blankets and you might be able to get money and they want to do those things, but then it's not cold and the weather's nice. And so they're like, oh, well, it's not so bad sleeping outside. There's so many other things to consider other than just that.
You are exactly right.
Right. So you did a great job of highlighting how all of that happens within organizations. And I focus a lot on building demand in my work and
To build demand. There's
not for
plenty of
that end
demand
of
in
it,
my
but
work.
to get those leaders we do, we need to
Yes.
build demand with them for them to see that they can really help. I think that's part of it is they don't see how they can really help.
Mhm.
And that connection with everybody together, you see the full picture. Like
Yes.
I may only have this one piece. It's hard for me to see the whole forest when I only have this one tree. But when you can get together and see how all of it works together as a system, now you know how my little tree fills the forest and is important.
That is such a good point. I even a good friend of mine works at the city and his focus is contracts, which, again, minutia,
Womp
detailed,
womp.
tedious. I know. Yeah, it's just like, that is not.
Necessary.
Yeah, but it is such an important piece. And for him to be able to look at a screen all day and focus on contracts and realize that, like, without this piece, literally the whole system collapses. So even the piece that feels just kind of soul sucking for many of us who like talking to people, it's such an important role. And I think you're exactly right. I think, we take a really broad approach to community. And I really believe that our communities are strongest when all of us have a place to call home and we all have a role to play in that. When a lot of times I talk to people who, that's the question, right? Is like, how can I help or what can I do? And obviously, donating, volunteering. But I always tell people start with being a nice person. You know, when you see someone on the street, that's a person who more than likely is really used to being ignored. They're used to being overlooked. They're used to people seeing them and quickly diverting eye contact. What if you just waved? What if you just a simple gesture of, I acknowledge that you are a person. Again, I don't think that that should let us off the hook entirely, but it's a really good place to start.
It really is. I mean, years ago, I was on jury duty. So walking outside of the federal
Yeah,
courthouse, there's homeless people that are sitting there. And, as a woman walking downtown, you're always protective of yourself anyway, which we shouldn't have to be,
right.
but we are. And as I'm walking, I actually made eye contact with a man that was unhoused and he smiled back at me. He didn't look away. And so I gave him $20. And I think he thought, well, I know he thought, oh, she didn't mean to give me this much money, which it was $20.
Uh-huh.
And he followed me down and said, ma'am, I don't think you
Oh my
meant
gosh.
right. I said, I did mean to give you that full amount. And so please have a good day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it didn't matter to me what he spent it on. I just
Right.
felt a individual connection to him.
Right.
And I think that oftentimes is what we're really missing. It's hard to connect. It's
Yeah.
hard to connect on an issue
Yeah.
without the individuals.
Yeah.
And you guys have done such a great job of doing that. Before we end, I wanted to talk a little bit about burnout. We talk about burnout a lot on the show because as women, we give, 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 give. And me personally, I can be deep into my reserve tank before I realize that I'm there. And then I'm done. And then I'm hard on myself about it.
Mhm.
So I have preemptive methods that my audience is used to hearing about, but you are in an industry that has all of the things that my industry has on top of emotional weight. So how do you prevent burnout from yourself, from that heaviness that is inevitable in what you do and with your team?
Yeah. Gosh, it's such a good question, and I'm so glad you asked it. So, I'm a mom and a wife. It's really important to me that I show up. I have 2 girls.
Oh, how exciting.
So, it's really important to me that I show up for my girls as the best version of myself. And I do this work because I believe this is the best version of myself. I do not believe that being a stay at home mom would be the best version of me for my girls. And it's really important to me that they see that. I think, again, we talked about this a little bit, but for me, in managing burnout, I think a big piece of it is allowing myself to feel. Which again, as women, sometimes I think the temptation is to like suppress our emotions because that's kind of what we're socialized to do. But for me, again, it's acknowledging that my emotions actually make me stronger. My emotions make me a better leader. They make me able to show up for people in a more real and authentic way. And I'm not going to push those down. So, like an example that I'll give you, we just had this wild snowstorm a couple weeks ago. Like you said, those are some of our busiest times. I went up
And
to our,
stressful.
they're very stressful. And it's stressful again as a mom because school's closed, daycare's closed. So I've got my kids at home and I'm trying to juggle, keeping them entertained with like my work being peak busyness.
Mhm.
And that can feel like a lot and it can feel really overwhelming. But I went to our winter shelter and I experienced the shelter and I get in my car and I cry. And I cry every time I leave that building. But again, to me, that's really important. I think the day that I get in my car and I don't cry is the day that I'm going to know this is not right for me anymore. This is not me being my best self because
Or
I'll
at
be,
least you need to take a step back and take care of
yeah,
yourself because
yeah,
burnout, one of the biggest questions I asked the first burnout expert that I had on the show, I think we had her in season 2. It's a reoccurring theme.
yep.
And the first question I asked was, how do I know that I'm burned out and I'm not just stressed out like normal? And that was the resentment. If you're starting to resent what you do, you're starting to resent the people that do it around you, then you've crossed over into that line. So if
Hmm.
you, taking you as an example, if you have, don't cry,
Yeah,
right? You may not be resentful, but you're not your normal self either.
I'm numb. Yeah,
Yes.
I don't wanna be numb. I do think, like, it is in my nature to feel moved by human suffering, right?
I
That's
think it's
core
in
to my,
everyone's
yeah,
nature. We
it's,
just block it because we're
yeah,
taught not to be emotional.
yeah,
Smile, you'd be a lot prettier if you smiled. And then men's the opposite of don't show emotion, hold it up. And it causes all of this friction and lack of emotional regulation.
mhm,
So crying is actually regulating for your emotions. It releases all of the
yep,
endorphins and all of the
completes that
hormones we
stress
need.
cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, again, that's a big part of managing my burnout is I feel my feelings. Everyone on my team has seen me cry. And I think that's okay. I'm a human. It's part of my experience here. And
It's
so,
part of why you're so good at what you do and at bringing people together because it's authentic. You don't
mhm,
hide from it. It makes them feel comfortable. If they feel emotional, they feel comfortable
mhm,
expressing that around you, if not anyone else. And
right.
if the CEO's comfortable with it, then that trickles down in a good way to everyone else
Yeah.
so that you're all together supporting one another.
I hope so. I mean, that was going to be my part too. The other thing is, again, I think I just continually have to remind myself I'm not doing this alone. I don't have to do this alone. It's okay to ask for help. And again, the reality is, I have an incredible team. I have an incredibly supportive partner. He literally called me 2 seconds before we started recording and he's having to go pick up our kid. But I'm not doing that, right? Because he's giving me the space to do what I need to do. I think, again, just recognizing that I'm not self-sufficient and that's okay. And that if I actually want to be the best version of myself, if I want to be in this work for the long haul, I have to acknowledge my shortcomings and I need to build up the people around me who can make up for my deficits, you know?
And
And I
they
think,
lean on too. They're part
and
of
that,
your ecosystem.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And so for me, that's really it. I feel my feelings and I don't try to do it alone.
So I have one more question before we get into our closing, and that is we have a worldwide audience, and the majority of communities of all sizes aren't doing it as well as you are. Let's be honest. There are some that are, but for the most part, they've got bits and pieces of it, and they haven't put that whole system together. What advice do you have for them? If they want to put something together like what you're doing, where's the first place for them to start?
So this is kind of cheesy, but it's also kind of real. Invite people to lunch. People like to eat. People like food. I mean, really, I think that's kind of a key part of our evolution as an organization. Almost 22 years old. When we founded 22 years ago, one of the very first things that we did, we invited all the shelter directors, all the directors of the local shelters to lunch. And at that first lunch, everyone introduced themselves to each other because they'd never met before, even though they were doing the same work in the same community within the same square mile, you know? And so I think, again, kind of silly, but a good place to start is like people are motivated by having their basic needs met. And if you feed them, they will come. And so just
And you can
getting
start the connection.
start the connection, get people around the same table. You know, it's especially now, we've just lost so much of that in the kind of post COVID. You know, we're having a virtual conversation. There's a lot of value in being able to connect across space, and having that virtual access is really important. But there's also something to be said for just gathering around the same table. And I think that's a really good place to start. It's literally where we started 22 years ago. You know, we didn't get where we are today overnight. We built that capacity, built those skills over years and years and years. And we started with having lunch together.
And it really dives into what we talk about on Deals with Heels every week, and that is connection,
Mhm.
right? Sales in any form is a
Yep.
transfer of enthusiasm. And if you try to transfer that enthusiasm before you've made a connection with somebody, it feels like pressure,
Yep.
feels like competition, it
Yep.
feels wrong. So
Force. Yeah.
yes, forced. And so you have to start building those connections. And that is a great way for anyone to start that wants to build what you guys have built here. It is truly impressive, very, very impressive. And I encourage everyone to take a look and see all the things that they're doing at the Oklahoma City Homeless Alliance. So, Megan, what is on the horizon? What is coming up for the OKC Homeless Alliance? And what can we do as leaders and as humans to help?
Yeah. I think, again, I'm really excited about where we're at as a community. I think you're going to see us looking again very high level strategically about which pieces of the system we own as providers, how we're working together, how we can again continue to invest in real partnerships. I'm very excited about that as we move forward. I'm really excited just for our own organization. I feel like my first year as CEO, my mantra was kind of don't break it. Don't break the thing that you love that is so wonderful. And I feel like, my next year was kind of focused on, okay, I didn't break it year one. Let me kind of get my sea legs and start thinking more about strategy. And so that's as I'm kind of heading into what will be my third year, which is wild to think about. But that's really where I'm kind of headed. And that's kind of the word that I've identified for myself is strategic. How can I be really strategic in all of those decisions? How can I pursue the things that are working for us? How can I let go of the things that aren't, both personally and professionally, right? And I think that that word is really energizing me and making me excited about what's to come.
That's awesome. So what's your greatest need? How can we help?
Gosh, again, we're a nonprofit, so we rely on community support. Following us on social media, even just keeping up with what's going on. And we try to keep the community really informed about, our current challenges and things like that. So that's a great place to start. Checking our website, homelessalliance.org, great place to learn about volunteer opportunities, our greatest in kind needs. Obviously, again, nonprofit, every nonprofit is going to say,
Money.
donate, donate, donate. We all need money, and that's very real. And then again, I would say help us be ambassadors, help us destigmatize, help us myth bust. If you're in a circle and people are talking negatively about people experiencing homelessness, gently correct them. Gently remind them that that's a human being. That's someone's mom, dad, sister, brother, daughter, son, right? Those are people, those are our neighbors. And I think if even starting there is such a huge step in the right direction and means so much to us as providers to know that there are people in the community who are helping spread that message and that it's not just us, kind of banging our heads against the wall.
Fantastic. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I had a little bit longer episode planned because I wanted to dive into this really important issue and highlight the great work that you guys are all doing at the Homeless Alliance and the other organizations that are working within your hub and
Mhm.
working together. It is inspiring to see,
Thank you.
and you should be really proud of everything that you've done
Thank
there in
you.
13 years. So, whether we're talking about homelessness, business growth, or organizational culture, sustainable impact requires structure, it requires trust, it requires long-term thinking and community. If this conversation challenged how you think about leadership and engagement and homelessness and nonprofit work, then my work will live beyond this podcast. You can learn more about how I help leaders build sustainable growth at hexagonmedia.com. Thank you so much for being a guest, Megan, and for being part of Podcastathon. There are over 3,000 episodes for Podcastathon happening this week. And so I encourage everyone, if you enjoyed this one, reach out, listen to another podcast, find out something about the people that are building great things in your community. And thank you so much, Megan, for coming on and sharing your story. It's so inspiring. A female
Thank you,
leader just
Deborah.
beginning to end and finding your passion and having to pivot midstream and do it. That's so often what we have to do. And many people fail there and end up working lifelong careers in something that they just don't love. And you're a living example of how it can turn out for the right way reasons and be fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you. I've had the best time talking to you. This has been great.
So that's it for today. Until next time, everyone, stand strong in your power, especially when it gets uncomfortable. See you next week.